Hello everyone, thank you for having me here today. This is Harim Jung, a data scientist focusing on the low carbon energy and sustainable growth. This is my portfolio based on the energy and the growth. And today, I'd love to talk about the hidden fact of the CO2 that you should know about. Do you know how to emit the CO2 in your daily life? You might think like I'm far away from the CO2 emission because I'm the owner of the Tesla Model A. I'm cooking with the induction cooktop, no BBQ party, and no direct fossil fuel. Though even you eat organic vegetable only, yes, you are totally emitting the CO2 because from morning to night, iPhone to Netflix, you cannot live without electricity because this is so essential for living. So, before I start with the visualization, I want to ask you one question. Are you really fine with the global warming and climate change? For me, no, and I guess you are not okay with it, and most of us are not okay because the earth is melting and the temperature is surging. Look at this great visualization, and you can see at one side the temperature is going really high. It's not only about the melting and surge, it's not only about the temperature, but it's more like wasting the energy on the CO2 tax. Think about how we can spend the CO2 tax on the other ways, like for sustainable growth or other welfare. So, to execute the emission reductions against the climate change, the UN agencies like IAEA, ARENA, and IEA already have set up for the decarbonization along with the energy transition. So some might get a question like, what is the energy transition? Here is the answer. Energy transition is displacing the fossil fuel to the renewable energy and nuclear energy. Normally, we call the low carbon energy is a merge of the renewable and the nuclear energy. So let's see. The renewable energy is growing really high and it also has a high record on the history. But at the same time, the CO2 emission, the cumulative one, are really amazing. You can see the slope and you can see the volume. Why? Because most of the energy consumption and demand is covered by fossil fuel, not the renewable, and not even from the nuclear. So, I will bring up a few ideas of the source of the electricity and the CO2 emissions. Electricity never comes along like a pure way. It have to be comes like from the power plant, and most of the power plant are covered by the fossil fuel before. But now it is covering by the renewable and nuclear energy like more and more. So as you can see, electricity is generated by the renewable energy source and fossil fuel and nuclear energy source. And look at the CO2. Normally, we call about the CO2 is like a total CO2 emissions, but I bring up the electricity generation related CO2 part here because bring up and generating the electricity also emitting the loss of share of the electricity. And in the statistical view, it takes almost like a 40% of total. Isn't it too much? Let's see the detail. Let's look at the deep dive digitalization. The main radial stack bar chart indicate the country level of the electricity generation per energy source. You can see the blue lines, you can see the blue dots. This is indicating for the renewable, and the red line is showing the fossil fuel share, and the last one, the dark blue, indicate the nuclear share. And look at the left inside bar. It indicates the average electricity generation per GDP group from the high income, upper middle income, lower middle, and the low. And it's also highly related to this plain text table. It shows the overall share of the percentage of share per GDP group and the energy source. So look at the case of the high income group. It takes like a 36% of the fossil fuel out of the whole total. And you can check the grand total. In 2000, nuclear take like almost like a 17%, and the fossil fuel take like almost like a 65%. Really huge. And from the percent of total, you can see the historical view at once. And of course, the visualization working well with the air condition. Look 2002, how it changed, and 2013, how it also changed. So let's go back to the 2000. And this is really important. The blue patterns from here, it directly shows the decarbonized power sector, not only from the blue, but including the dark blue. We call renewable and nuclear is indicating for low carbon energy. This is the goal of the transition to a sustainable energy future. And interestingly, in 2018, as you can see, renewable take 25% of total electricity generation. And from 2000, renewable take 18% of total. But as you can see, the most of the low carbon share from out of the total, it didn't change that much for 20 years. It means the appetite of the renewable has been increased. We never can say like the appetite of nuclear has been decreased, but the energy mix has been changed and the mixing portfolio is also upgraded. Let's see the country level of detail one by one and year by year. So we need to click the volume graph to see the detail. And let's see. So let's see the case of the UAE. In 2000, the UAE take 100% of the fossil fuel source for the electricity generation. And as you can see, the NEL countries like Qatar, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, they also have the same value, like 100% of the share of fossil fuel, because they come from the GCC groups. So let's compare to the GDP average. As you can see, compared to the average, the UAE's total amount of electricity generation is pretty low. And we can get from the historical view because the UAE has been growing so much and with the high economic growth and also energy demand and consumption is growing together. And this time, let's see the case of another case. I want to pick like a high nuclear France and look at the case of the France. So the case of the France is way different from here. As we can see, the nuclear source take like approximately 78% and the renewable take like 13%. It means like a vast of the electricity was generated by clean and low carbon energy. So compared to the average of the fossil fuel, it is almost like 1/3. It's really different, and it means the other demand and consumption is covered by the low carbon electricity. So let's see the case of the France in historical view. As you can see, the France case of the electricity generation is almost like flattened. It means like consumption and demand are already in saturation mode. And let's see from the GDP group. In the high income groups, as you can see, most of the energy portfolio is pretty well balanced, considering that this is 2000, almost like 20 years ago. So lots of countries already have a renewable and also the pretty enough of the nuclear. To see the case of the upper middle, yeah, not like high income, but at least they have lots of renewable and also some of the nuclear are coming up together and working. But the case of the low carbon, we can see like only few countries have a nuclear share, but this is pretty much Lithuania. This is really interesting. Let's see the case of Lithuania. Sadly, from the 2010, Lithuania already decided to stop operating the nuclear, so we can get ourselves from the historical view. And to see the case of the low income, you can see like there's not much even the nuclear, and from the here the total side we can get like Only the 0.6% taken from the low income but nuclear. So it has to be grown so much. Even the renewable are the same. To catch the total historical change view, let's move up the years. Did you find something interesting? The lower middle income groups share is surging. And look, in 2008, the CO2 emission from the lower middle income exceeded the volume of the high incomes one. But from the average volume of the graph, even the high incomes one is slightly higher than the lower middle incomes one. So, in this case, we can ask a question to a hidden data story like what really contributes together to the CO2 emissions? Let's go a little bit more. 2009, 10, and 11. Interesting. 2010, 2011. Both of the high income and upper middle income have a similar fossil fueled electricity, as you can see, but the CO2 emissions are way different. Now we can guess and figure out the energy mix makes sense. Even the average of the renewable, as you can see, 8.9, 8.6. It's like a similar though, working together with the nuclear source makes CO2 emissions lower down. That is why we should keep up the low carbon energy mix supported by nuclear power. Look, high income group have a 9.5, but the other has a lower than 1.5, and the emission is pretty lower even compared to the fossil fuels volume. So go back to the 2008. Now it is too obvious. Look at the case of the nuclear share. Because the high income has a loss of share of the nuclear, so we can call it a well-balanced energy mix, which reduces the CO2 emission really efficiently. To see the near days, let's move to the 2018. Interestingly, upper middle income group has really high volume of the electricity generated by the fossil fuel, and it also has a loss of volume of the CO2 emission. Yes, because the economy has been radically growing and it also needs high demand of the energy consumption. Let's see the case of the high income group. Wow, this is really interesting of these two countries, the Sweden and Swiss. Look at the fossil fuel share, and both of the countries are really impressive because almost 90-70% of the electricity is covered by low carbon electricity. This is really amazing. And let's see another case of the country. I want to pick like the United States. So to see the case of the United States, the low carbon energy share added by the nuclear and renewable, it takes approximately 35%. Let's see the case of the volume. Click the United States and look at the volume. This is majesty because we have to consider about the scale. That is why sometimes we need to think over beyond the statistic indeed. So, and let's see the case of the low income. As you can see, low income group has really interesting share. Can you see the renewable is higher than the fossil fuel only? And I want to see the case of the Ethiopia in this case. Click below and find out the Ethiopia here. I found Ethiopia and click it. Wow, look at the historical statistics. As you can see, the electricity volume has been surged gradually and kept the renewable 100%. This is also really remarkable actually. Now let's change the topic to the CO2. As you can see, the slope and the volume of the cumulative CO2 emissions is increasing up. Even The low carbon energy included by the renewable nuclear has been sorted together because look at the yellow part. The electricity related CO2 emission has been growing gradually, and that is almost like a 40% of the total, and it takes for like 20 years. As you can see, there's not much differences per years. And as you can see from the historical view of the electricity generation by energy source, the fossil fuel share has been almost like flattened for nearly 65, 64. So to reduce the CO2 emission, we should decrease the CO2 from the electricity generation by increasing the mixed portfolio of low carbon energy source. As you can see the change of the flow patterns. And I cannot call electricity related CO2 is the only contributor though, but it is one single large contributor of the CO2 emissions that we can totally replace by low carbon energy mix. So I hope you can understand a better understanding of why we should follow the energy transition for us and the future us and generation. Thank you so much for the new topic and also new visualization. And also thank you for this great opportunity for data visualization society so much. And if you have any question, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.